All right, my name is Julie Owen, and it's my honor to serve on the Dunwoody Board of Trustees, and I'm thrilled to be here today. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you this morning for this series and our distinguished guest and leader, Gloria Perez, President and CEO of the Women's Foundation of Minnesota. Before introducing Gloria, I did want to give you a bit of background about Dunwoody and the women at Dunwoody. Gloria shared that the last time she was on campus was 20 years ago when she was executive director of the Jeremiah program. Wow, so over the past 20 years, we've come a long way. We've done a lot in the educating and graduating women in technology and the skilled trades, and we're committed to inspiring even more women to pursue an education in STEM and in the trades. Today, as a point of reference, 19% of our students are women. Number isn't as high as I'd like it to be, but it's a lot higher than it used to be, and we are making progress. At Dunwoody, we do recognize that there are systemic barriers and disparities that get in the way for women and their ability to thrive in all environments, and especially in some trades that have been typically male-dominated. So today, we have 4 programs that are helping to close those gaps. One is our Women in Technical Careers program, which is focused on serving low-income women, prioritizing women of color, and single mothers. So all of those folks that might have a couple extra barriers to making it all come together. And the Women's Foundation was very supportive in providing our generous funding to help us launch this 7 years ago. So what a nice coincidence. And then secondly, we have our Women's Initiatives program that we started last year to support the needs of all the women students at Dunwoody. Recently, we reimagined the Kate Dunwoody Society, and this is providing support, mentorship, career opportunities, exposure to industry leaders, a lot of those kind of programs that give women just a little extra boost as they're working on their career. And lastly, just coming up on November 16th, we have our Kate Dunwoody Society Luncheon, and we'll be supporting women pursuing careers in tech and the skilled trades for that. So breaking down barriers for women from all backgrounds is a complex issue, and it's going to take all of us to make an impact. The Women's Foundation of Minnesota is one such place that breaking down these barriers and providing solutions and opportunities for girls and women to thrive. We are grateful to the foundation for their generous support of Dunwoody and our initiatives. So now about Gloria. So Gloria is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Women's Foundation, where she leads the first statewide women's foundation in the country. I didn't know that either, Gloria, so that is just fantastic. The Women's Foundation has distributed more than $45 million through community investments. The foundation conducts ongoing research on the status of women and girls in Minnesota, advocates for public policy that results in greater economic security and safety for women and their families, and invests in organizations and leaders to achieve gender and racial justice. An amazing mission. Prior to her role at the Women's Foundation, Gloria became one of the country's leading experts in 2 generational strategies to reducing poverty. And this was in her role as president and CEO of the Jeremiah program, a national nonprofit whose proven holistic approach transforms family from poverty to prosperity. Gloria has over 25 years of experience across sectors, ranging from small business, for-profit, nonprofit, and human service organizations. She's a graduate of McAllister College, and she's a recipient of numerous awards. She serves on the board of directors at Esperanza United, McAllister College, Hazelton Betty Ford Foundation, the Cerisi Walburn Foundation, and the St. Paul and Minnesota Foundation. Gloria has 2 children, lives in Minneapolis with her husband, and let's give her a warm welcome.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's so wonderful to be here. I said there's got to be a lot of dedication in this room to be here so early, so thank you so much. I can tell you that being at the Women's Foundation is such a great pleasure for me. Thank you, Katie, and to President Wagner, who couldn't be here today, and the team for inviting me to just share with you a little bit about women's leadership, the Women's Foundation of Minnesota's investments in gender and racial justice, and I'll share a little bit about what the research tells us as we share a commitment to lead transformation for women in the workforce. And we know that creating pathways for women to access education and advance in technical careers and all careers is one way to knock down barriers and achieve family support wages and benefits that all women deserve. But today, I want to start by sharing a bit of my leadership journey, one that began when I was in college at Macalester. And then I'll share about how the Women's Foundation is investing in change, not just through grant making, but also through our leading research, through policy action for economic opportunity, safety, and expanded leadership for communities pushed to the margins. And then I'll wrap up with some ideas about what we can do to accelerate success for women in the workplace, some of which we're already working on together. Oops, let me see. I just shared that. Okay, here we go. Mentorship. So I want to share this quote because I believe in the power of mentorship. And as a transplant to Minnesota, I could never figure out why people who didn't know me wanted to help me. I think that these generous souls had a sense of our interconnectedness, a belief that by being a resource for me, they were creating a better place for themselves and for all of us. But needless to say, mentors have been instrumental in my leadership journey. And now I think of the power I have as a community leader and the importance of using the power that I have to transform lives by offering the guidance and support that young people need to find their path, to feel a supportive network within the community. And so I like to say I'm a Minnesotan by choice. I was born and raised in San Antonio, Texas, and my father passed away when I was 10, and I was raised by my mom who never remarried, so she was a single mom for a lot of her life. And after high school, I decided I needed to leave Texas to sort of spread my wings, grow and explore the rest of the world. And that's what led me to Minnesota. It's 1,200 miles on 35, and I never left. I've always lived here. I also like to say that I hold multiple identities. I am a daughter of Mexican Americans. I am a granddaughter of Mexican immigrants who believed in the promise of economic opportunity and hard work. I am a community advocate who believes in the importance of giving back because, as the saying goes, to whom much is given, much is required. And lastly, I'm a follower of Paulo Freire, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and Paul Wellstone. I just loved Paul and Sheila, and he said, we all do better when we all do better. And I knew I had found my work home when I got to the Women's Foundation, and they said that they have a saying, which is, we all do better when those who experience the greatest barriers do better, which I really thought was just a lovely emphasis on the work that we do. So as a college student, I made Macalester my educational home. Of course, now I'm on their board, which is new. But growing up, I was taught that education was a key lever out of poverty. And now I know that for many Black, Indigenous women of color, this is not the case. And I'll say more about that. But it was at college that I learned how to lean into my own strengths and use them as an asset to contribute to community and build a network of support. As a student, Macalester encouraged me to build a robust volunteer practice. And it was that volunteer practice that really turned into what I would say now are our lifelong relationships and certainly my career. So I know that for too many Black, Indigenous women of color, getting an education is not enough to lead a safe, prosperous life. And I do this work for equity and justice out of love for humanity and gratitude for the opportunities that I've been given. So these experiences, as I say, really blossomed into my career, and I always encourage people to pursue their volunteer passions because you never know where they will lead you. As I said, mentorship continues to play a pivotal role in my life as a leader today. I believe, as the activist Lila Watson says, that the work we do as a community foundation, in higher education, in business, and in nonprofits, That service to others will lead to our shared liberation. And so I came to the Women's Foundation to work on the systemic issues that contribute to inequities after serving as the founding executive director at Jeremiah. And now we're really working at the foundation to address the root causes that cause organizations like Jeremiah Program to exist. So let me share about the Women's Foundation. At the foundation, we are on a mission to create a Minnesota where all girls and women can thrive. As a statewide community foundation, we believe deeply in the power of community solutions that our grantee partners and nonprofit organizations across the state are building to end racial and gender injustice. Through our grant making, we provide access to opportunities for girls and women to build economically prosperous, safe lives and to grow as leaders. We believe that women and girls are at the center of families and communities, and that investing in them, particularly those who have been pushed to the margins, will mean transformational change for Minnesota. When we center women and girls experiencing the greatest barriers and invest in their solutions, families and communities thrive. So as was mentioned, since 1983, the Women's Foundation has been investing more than $45 million in communities around the state. And we do this by funding research and listening in community. We invest in statewide nonprofits across the state, predominantly in the metro, but also in western and north Minnesota. We host cross-sector convenings and partnerships with our colleagues and other institutions. We work to change harmful narratives that hold women back, and then we lead policy and advocacy to remove barriers and increase equity and justice. So part of changing systems is changing harmful attitudes and behaviors about women and girls and what they can do, which is one of the reasons I'm so excited to talk with you about the work you lead, changing systems through women in technology and the work that you do. Research we commission every other year, called The Status of Women and Girls, is one of the cornerstones of who we are at the Women's Foundation. We know that research is at its best when it's taken to communities. When we ask communities across the state, how does this resonate? What is your experience? What do you need to thrive? How do you define economic security, and what is standing in your way? The results of our Road to Transformation listening series are continually informing our statewide agenda for gender and racial justice as we invest in grant making, policy, strategic partnerships, narrative change, and research. So you see here some of the themes that emerged from our intentional listening across 9 different communities in 2020. Through these themes, we can see how safety, economics, mental and physical health work together to impact the lives of women working today. At the foundation, we often think of a quote by Audre Lorde that says, "There's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not lead single issue lives." And so it's important that our investments and the programs we fund acknowledge the many roles and experiences of women, so we can target solutions that address all of the identities that they hold. Insights from our listening sessions have guided the way to our expanded investments in safety, economic justice, holistic well-being, reproductive justice, and community power and leadership. So I'll spend a few minutes now looking at our biennial research report to share some of the research we see regarding women and girls in Minnesota today. The Status of Women and Girls report for Minnesota shows that women's economic security intersects with every other issue in a woman's life. It impacts her health, her safety, her access to leadership opportunities. Through some of these data points, we are disheartened because for the state of working women in Minnesota, they do point to the importance of the great work that you are doing here to reverse the trends and support women's pathways into technical fields. We have to celebrate some of the things that are happening. Minnesota is a national leader in women's workforce participation, with a labor force participation rate of 62% among all women. Minnesota is second in the nation behind the District of Columbia. 79% of mothers with children under 6 participate in the labor force, comprising 50% of all women in the labor force. And this points to the opportunities we share to remove barriers to women's ability to pursue any path she imagines and encourage women to pursue paths she can't even imagine. And then we have to ensure that the work is well supported with pay and benefits that acknowledge the important role women play in their families. Make sure I'm on the right slide. When we look at the data in the report, we see that women and women of color in particular are the heads of their families. And so our solutions have to respond to what they say are key supports to their success in the workforce. At the same time, when women make up the majority of Minnesota workers who are paid at or below minimum wage, even with advanced degrees, we see in the pandemic, the work women do frequently lacks the kind of security and benefits, including sick leave, that all people need, particularly when women are heads of household, which of course they frequently are. And at the same time, support for caregiving, including affordable quality childcare, has moved increasingly out of reach. One piece to understanding why women often struggle economically is occupational clustering, which is one cause behind the gender wage gap. As a society, we place more value on jobs that are occupied by men. Women of color and Native American women in particular are concentrated in low-wage service occupations that are, by and large, underpaid and lack in benefits. In contrast, as you might know, men account for over 80% of construction, farming, and military occupations and over 70% of computer and production occupations. And so what can we do to reverse this reality? We can increase women's wages overall, and when we look at where women are working, we see the opportunity to increase women's participation in mid and high-wage careers, just like you are doing here at Dunwoody. In this graph, depicting the ratio of women and men in different two-year degreed programs, from construction to mechanics on the left to health professions on the right, we see a very clear illustration of the clustering. In higher levels of education, clustering continues with far fewer women in STEM, for example. Going back to what we learned from our listening sessions, what we heard from working women in particular is that these factors make a difference and are worthy of our collective investments. In addition to fair pay for work, participants talked about how they need better access to flexible and affordable childcare, educational opportunities, especially for immigrant and first-generation women who may also be mothers. The teachers they see as they move through the education system matters. Do they see educators who look like them? Can they connect their futures with the people they see working in their schools? They need to feel safe and recommend that all genders learn about healthy relationships and work to reframe gender norms and household responsibilities. Working women said that when both partners share in the responsibilities of home and caregiving, the burden of unpaid childcare and domestic work shifts to a more equitable distribution of labor. Through our funding, particularly to increase women's pathways to non-traditional careers in construction, engineering, we see how wraparound supports make schooling and training possible. Women are often the backbones of their families. They're caring for children and elders. And girls are often caring for younger siblings. We heard this a lot during the pandemic. We must make their steps in education accessible and understand the real responsibilities that they have in their lives. Maybe they need some financial education and support from a person to help them fill out financial aid forms. Maybe they need daycare to allow them to go to school. And maybe they need a counselor or someone in a similar field telling them that they can do it. We know it often works best if they learn in a cohort, and that they're not the only women in the program, or they're not the only immigrant woman, or the only Latina or Black woman in the program. When they have support in numbers, we know that they will get the support from their sisters. While we have heard from our listening about how systems have failed mothers and caregivers, we do hear how women facing barriers support and uplift each other. So we also have to focus on the strengths that women bring to the workforce and look at our networks of interlocking support. We all need community, and these supports offer so much more than the job skills alone. When we look at the area of leadership in our Status of Women and Girls research, we see some progress and definite areas where we can improve, especially as we think about how institutions can help move the needle and create the stronger workforce we need for our future. The research shows that gender, racial, and other types of diversity in leadership and representation brings clear benefits, from economic innovation to deeper community support for democratic institutions. This is why when we think about leadership, we're looking at more than just corporate leadership or women in elected office. We're also looking at who's voting, who's at the front of the classroom, who's running for school board and sitting on the city council, and who's at the forefront of local movements. So one key lever of our work at the foundation is policy change to increase gender and racial equity and justice. We were instrumental in passing the Women's Economic Security Act in 2014, and we're at the table today to ensure that the workforce benefits of this law are experienced by everyone across all fields. And we will continue to support women of color, entrepreneurs, and business owners of all ages and organizations that create the conditions for them to thrive in the long term. So Dunwoody's Women in Technical Careers program is a key partner to building pathways for women to succeed in the workforce. We invest in removing barriers to women's participation in the workforce so that childcare, lack of financial education, and safety don't hold her back from achieving her dreams and the stability needed to thrive in whatever field she chooses. When I think about how we can take action to make change, we at the foundation know that equity in design results in equity in outcomes. And when we create systems designed with equity at the core, when we put in place solutions that are informed by the people who are experiencing the greatest barriers, we will get different results, and ultimately we will start doing business differently. As institutions, we can work to ensure young women have opportunities and pathways to high-skill, high-wage careers and jobs, increase participation in STEM fields and technical careers, and increase opportunities and pay for young women in fields dominated by men. New emerging networks are necessary to overcome the gaps we see in connections and access. So as we look around the table, wherever we're developing solutions or a plan in the workplace, we have to ask, whose perspective is missing? What can we do to create inclusive workplaces? We wish to amplify the leadership of those most impacted and invite partnership across sectors to create more sustainable change that's rooted at the level of our systems, that's built into our institutions, and that asks each of us what we can do as individuals to support this change. Also, on an institutional level, we need to build better pipelines specifically designed to prepare and support post-secondary education for young women who experience the greatest disparities. Through our investments, we work with our partners to address key barriers that contribute to ongoing educational barriers or disparities, including the lack of diverse role models, class selections, and guidance counseling the need for additional information, especially for first-generation college students, and inadequate funding and other strategies addressing high costs and debt burdens associated with post-secondary education that disproportionately affect young women. And we also need national and state policies that move the dial. So it's time to move beyond individual failings to consider solutions that incorporate some important frameworks that will allow us to move ahead and achieve real, lasting structural change. So as I close, I hope you can see how leadership matters and how the data and the listening shows us the importance of the role we can each play in leading with an equity-centered lens. Understanding the unique perspective of community most affected by barriers is essential when we consider how to approach solutions and who we invite to be part of the decision-making in changing our culture to truly walk the talk when it comes to equity. As we transform systems for a stronger Minnesota, we see the research as a call to others, to business leaders and leaders in all sectors, to invest in women and girls. We know these investments benefit not just women and girls, but their families and whole communities. Thank you. I think we're going to take questions now.
Thank you so much, Gloria.
Oh,
we've got some time for some questions. We can open it up. If people want to raise their hands, I'll be quick to run the microphone on over to you. Okay, right over here.
Hi there. Thanks so much for being here, Gloria. This is wonderful, and I really appreciate the information on your research. I'm just wondering, what is a piece of advice that you received during your journey that you still value today and you could share with all of us that might be helpful?
Thank you for the question. I think a piece of the advice that I received, and frankly, I still receive it today, I think, is to face your fears. You know, as I'm literally not kidding. When I arrived in Minnesota in the fall of whatever that year was, 84, 85, it was cold. It was much colder than it is now. And I was walking like with these like leather boots and a mini skirt and going to college, and some older man who had a bookstore on Snelling Avenue said, "Young lady, what are you doing? Don't you know you're in Minnesota? Go buy yourself a coat," you know? And, you know, it was like that, just sort of like that friendliness, right? Matters. It really mattered, that eye contact, you know, that I was being seen. And then as I was not having good experiences, let's say, you know, in my classroom or whatever, and I would go and share that with somebody, they would really listen, and they would say, well, if your gut is telling you that this isn't right, then let's figure out what is right for you. So that message that I was receiving was that there was nothing wrong with me, but there was something wrong with the environment. And that really validated my experience. And so I think that that notion of like face your fear, you know, my fear of saying something because I didn't want to be seen as a troublemaker, my fear of, you know, feeling like I didn't belong, my fear of being the, you know, the successor to an 18-year CEO at the Women's Foundation, you know, my fear of what's it going to be like to speak in front of people after being on Zoom for so many years, you know, all of those things, it's like they're constant messages. I'll just segue to say, we were talking with some young people in our Young Women's Initiative the other day, and she said, you know, I'm hearing that this is the most important election that we'll ever have. And she said, you know, I heard that like the last time that we were all together. And I said, well, exactly. Like every election is the most important election that you'll ever vote in, because it's true. Like you have to do it early and often. And it's the same thing with the messages that we tell ourselves. We have to continue to have those tapes that tell us that we have the right to be here, we have the right to pursue the dreams and to dream, to imagine new frontiers for ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming in. So my question is about policy change. You mentioned a little bit, and I'm just wondering if there's anything that you're currently working on or certain issues that are needing addressing that you're seeing right now?
Thank you. So, yes, we have a policy agenda at the Women's Foundation, and in the area of economics, we continue to work on Women's Economic Security Act, so WESA, with the Attorney General. We also have been working on the creation of the Office for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, and trying to create an office for missing and murdered African American women. Safety, economic opportunity have been a couple. The family FMLA is an issue that is very near and dear to our hearts. But at the moment, what we have been focusing on this last legislative session has really been to elevate information. So sharing our research at the legislature is really important for us to do every year. But what I was going to say is, at the moment, because we have a divided legislature, things are not advancing. You know, there were funds allocated to invest in entrepreneurship for women, and so they might have gotten through committee, but they didn't pass. And so it's just important for us to continue to build those relationships and be that bridge, so that we can get some of these opportunities passed. And our intention is to show up again at the legislature and continue to share that message and develop allies across both sides of the aisle. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions?
I know it's very difficult to gather research in times like this, but could you speak to the process of how you select these listening communities and what comprises them and how you compose them?
Yes, absolutely. So we partner with the University of Minnesota, first of all, in our research. So the Center for Women and Gender Policy is our research partner. Dr. Christina Ewig leads that work. The listening sessions are led by the Women's Foundation. And so we have grantee partners across the state, and they help us curate, along with other organizational partners, foundations, some of our Minnesota initiatives, which are foundations in greater rural Minnesota, help us curate those conversations. It used to be that, again, in the before times, as we say, the Women's Foundation staff would literally spend a week in, northern Minnesota, western, southern Minnesota. And of course, with the pandemic, which is my whole existence at the Women's Foundation, we've been able to do that with Zoom. And we've had incredible participation, actually, from greater Minnesota in those conversations. And so it's those networks, some of the educational institutions. So we have partnerships in Bemidji, with Bemidji State, and in Hibbing, and in Duluth. And so some of those institutions bring to us not only students and young women, but also some of the partner organizations that are actually delivering services. And then we continue to do those conversations throughout the year. And then when the new data is released, we take that out to them and then ask them again, have things changed for you? Have they improved? What are you seeing in your community? Thank you.
All right, another question here.
Good morning, Gloria.
Good morning.
I guess I was had my eyes opened on that slide that you showed of percentages of mothers in the workforce that were single mothers or head of household. Having been a single father, I know the difficulties of finding childcare. Those numbers, are those nationwide numbers? Are they Minnesota numbers?
Minnesota numbers.
And those were 13 to 17. Have they changed at all, or did they get worse during the pandemic?
That's a great question. We don't have the data yet as to whether they got worse. I would venture to say that they've probably gotten worse. What can I say? I'm glad that as a single father, you can appreciate the challenges of trying to balance it all. And I think that is one of the things that I loved as an example about being at Jeremiah program, where you could have single parents, particularly mothers, come together to be that support network for each other. But during the pandemic, we saw increases. Again, what we have heard, and we'll do the research again this year to know more. What we heard was that women were experiencing increases in violence in their homes. And so I think that's going to contribute to more single parenting. We also heard that there was an increase in mental stress on families. And so I think that is also going to contribute to it. So we are in, very hard times. And so I think it's very important to really shine a light on what are some of those solutions, because they translate to others, right? It's like what is good for a single parent is also good for a two-parent family. So I'm hopeful about that.
Okay, right here.
Thanks for being here and thanks for your work. I had a question about, as you think about allocating resources in your policy advocation, is there an age level or a stratification at which those resources could make the biggest impact, whether it's elementary, middle school, high school programs, preparation for work, mothers? Where does it make the most impact, or what is the most underserved?
That's a really great question. I would say, if we're talking about, if we're talking about safety, if we're talking about economic opportunity, I think those early years are very important in terms of, being able to allocate dollars to those early years. But I'm also a practical person. And I think we need to look at where are those windows of opportunity. And if those windows of opportunity are in that other age group that is in post-secondary education, then we need to look at that and how can we make sure that that's addressing the barriers that, women, girls, and those who are pushed to the margins are experiencing. But if we had a blank slate, I would say that those early years are really important. And, as I talked about safety, having everybody rethink like healthy gender norms and making sure that we're having families be supported and understand the importance of early childhood education, to really have early opportunities to imagine themselves in different career paths and to invest in STEM early is really important. But without a doubt, we need to make sure that when we're looking at policy that we're seeing where those opportunities are and go there. Thanks.
All right, right over here.
I have a question about your revenue sources, and I wondered if you had any partnerships with any of the big corporations around Minnesota who help you achieve your mission.
Thank you. Yes. So we do have some. So our business model as a foundation, we have donor advised funds that we manage. So we're a community foundation, and so we co-invest with some of our donor partners. We also run periodic campaigns. We have an endowment that helps to fund some of our operation, and then we raise funds to grant out to the community. In terms of the corporations that we have partnerships with, some of them are for funding, and then others are, as an example, with Best Buy Corporation through their Teen Tech Center to really shine a gender lens and recruit girls in their teen center. But definitely Best Buy has been a champion. US Bank has been a partner of ours. BMO Harris has been a partner. So, we're continuing to develop those corporate partnerships, but I don't know how many of you knew about the Women's Foundation very much before today, but I was just at an event for women, and I think there were 1,500 folks that came through there, and the majority of them didn't know about the Women's Foundation of Minnesota. And so I think we've been like a very well-kept secret, to be honest, where we have had a small but very fierce, very bold group of women who have been supporting the foundation over decades, now nearly 40 years. And so the intention is to really share the work of the foundation so that we can garner more support. But what I was also going to say is the Young Women's Initiative that we have, which is in partnership with the governor's office, brings together leaders from across all sectors. And so we have small business like a women-owned business out of Wyoming Machinery, is a partner of ours, and we're bringing together the business community with the education community, with nonprofit leaders, and then with other philanthropic leaders, so that we can all try to address these issues together and think about what are those systems and practices that we can put in place in our own institutions, recognizing that sometimes our own institutions haven't been designed to address the people who are most experiencing inequities. And so how do we change our own practices and policies so that we can make the workplace more equitable?
Thank you. Are there others? Oh, okay, I'll do here and then here.
With all the change you've been trying to bring about, what's an area you've noticed was a little more like stubborn, a little bit harder that you have to put more work into for, women?
Yeah, that is such a wonderful question. Thank you. So with all the change we've been trying to bring about, I would say hearts and minds of individuals who have not had the opportunity to see the inequities up front and close is probably the biggest barrier that we've had. When I think about the barriers that Black, Indigenous women of color have, like in the metro area, and I talk with our rural partners as an example, they don't understand, they have trouble really getting their hands around some of the challenges that women in the core are having, because they have very different stubborn issues in rural Minnesota, and vice versa. And so it's like, how can we, so bringing those two realities together to have healthy dialogue and bridge understanding, because I would venture to say that the inequities that women and girls are experiencing in rural Minnesota are rooted in the same kinds of persistent issues that Black, Indigenous women in the city experience. And so how do we bring those two ideas together? And the importance of having that understanding is, unless we change hearts and minds, actions won't follow. And so I would say that's probably been the biggest challenge that I've seen in the last 2.5 years. And again, not being able to be in community, not being able to bring people together physically to build that kind of understanding has been a barrier, but I'm hopeful for the future.
Hi, thanks for being here. My question is, what can we as members of the community do to support the work of the Women's Foundation?
Thank you for the question. Tell your friends about the Women's Foundation of Minnesota. Let them know that we are a community foundation, so people can do their philanthropy through the foundation. We not only do grants, but we do this research. We do these kinds of convenings, and we want to invite people in to be part of those conversations. I've talked about the fact that we have centered young women in our policy and advocacy work at the legislature. For years, these young women have been showing up. During the pandemic, the governor brought together all his commissioners, and they sat with young women from our cabinet to hear how young girls across the state of Minnesota were faring during the pandemic. And I think that's terrific. And I think there's also an opportunity for the Women's Foundation to be a bridge for older women, for mid-career women, to hear how we are experiencing Minnesota in the midst of a pandemic. And so so the Women's Foundation's intention is to be that connector to our policymakers, to our philanthropy community, so that we can really understand what's going on. And as I was talking about investing early, what we know is inequities compound over a lifetime. So if you think about it in financial terms, our parents always told us, like, put some money aside, because if you put that money aside, it'll compound with interest. Well, when you don't have an opportunity to put money aside or invest in your education early on, you don't reap the benefits of that compounding value. So, thank you.
Thank you.
You're doing such great work in a variety of areas. So when I think of like generating reports as data analytics, and you got advocacy and you're setting up new programs, I was curious what your staff look like, and what percentage of women do you employ? And
Yeah, that's a great question. I was just talking with the board the other day about what are they most proud of in our almost 40 years. And somebody said, I'm really proud that we now have men on the board. And of the 20 staff that I have, we have one man in our community impact. So we're predominantly staff of women. 40% women of color. Our leadership team is 60% women of color. And then to your question about how we're staffed, we have a very robust, finance and administration department, because we're managing not only our own money, but the funds of our donor partners. We also have a community impact team, and their job is to be in community and to do the grant making, and to execute the listening sessions that we do in community. And then we have a policy and strategic initiative arm. It's like 3 people, but they are working on our advocacy. They are helping with the National Young Women's Initiative that we have in partnership with other women's foundations, as well as our local Young Women's Initiative. And then we have a advancement department, which is helping us raise the funds so that we can continue to do this great work. So we've grown in the last 2.5 years, but we also have a new strategic plan that is really leaning into the fact that we need to be more bold about driving investment in women and girls. And so as a result, we've increased our advancement team by a few members. So yeah, it's a really great organization to work for. And then, as I said, these strategic partnerships that we have with the University of Minnesota, with our young, the YWCA of St. Paul is a strategic partner of ours in helping to guide and counsel our young women who are part of our cabinet. So we have a really great team. Do we have any open positions? Great question. I believe we have one, and my HR director said we almost seem to always have one. So I think, yes, check us out on the website.
But no Dunwoody employees can apply, correct?
Yes, thank you. Right, exactly. We could talk about partnership. How's that?
Exactly. All right, we have time for one more question. Is there another one? I see a hand.
Hi, you talked a little bit about an area where you're facing challenges to making progress. I was wondering, opposite to that, if there's an area where you're making a lot of progress and you're really excited about the direction things are going in a positive way.
Yes, thank you for that. I would say, well, there's so much to be excited about, to be perfectly honest. I said to somebody with the pandemic and the uprising for justice, where we saw young women leading a lot of the movements for justice and kind of elevating, shining a light on the inequities in our communities. I feel like it's a perfect platform for the Women's Foundation to share the work that we do. Like, this is what we're talking about. If we don't invest in women and girls, again, early and often, we are going to see them be the first ones out of employment, opting out of the workforce, not being able to earn comparable wages in the workplace. And so I feel like, sadly, the environment that we're in kind of just elevates the importance of the work. I would also say that there is a renewed enthusiasm. So 40 years, we're a pro-choice organization. We have funded pro-choice organizations over the course of our history, but we never really talked about it. And I can understand why. It could, be a divisive issue. However, as we were doing our strategic plan and talking about the intersections of holistic well-being and thinking about that with community in the largest sense of what it means to be well, what we heard was that reproductive justice was part of what it means to be well, to have bodily autonomy. And so we took a stand and said, in addition to advancing safety and economic justice and leadership, we want to advance holistic well-being for women, and that includes reproductive justice. And so, there's been a lot of positive support for that decision. And again, it can be divisive, and I think the Women's Foundation has been that organization that has said, well, let's come and talk about the importance of coming together on what we can agree on and make sure that all families are well, because that's ultimately what we want. We want children to live in safe environments and women to have employment where they can care for their kids and so on and so forth. So I think the greatest success has been that enthusiasm where people kind of say, yes, please grow, please share more, please be at the legislature. So I really appreciate the invitation to be here and talk about the work with all of you. Thank you.